It's 10 o'clock. You're watching Sky News live from St James's Palace in central London, where the historic meeting of the Accession Council is just about to begin.
The business for part one of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the Clerk of the Council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the King.
God save the King.
I now invite those on the platform to sign the proclamation.
First to sign, the Prince of Wales. Her Majesty the Queen Consort. Signing, Camilla R. Regina, Queen. The Lord President of the Council. The First Lord of the Treasury and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. One of the great officers of state, holding an appointment that goes back into the history of time, the Archbishop of Canterbury. It will be his responsibility to crown the new king. His signature, Justin Cantuar, cross, cross. Cantuar, the Latin for Canterbury. The Archbishop of York, his signature, Stephen Ebor, cross, cross, Archbishop of York. Lord Privy Seal, later on, the gathering of all those present will be added with their signatures to this document. All of them invited to sign as they've witnessed the announcement of the death of Queen Elizabeth II. And they are formally acknowledging that this be read out to the kingdom to confirm the new king. Finally, the Earl Marshal of England, the Duke of Norfolk, who is responsible for organising not only the state funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, but will be organising the coronation of His Majesty the King.
Drafts of 8 orders of council. 1. Ordering the proclamation to be printed and published in specialist supplements in the London, Edinburgh and Belfast Gazettes. 2. Directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamation proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III. 3. Directing the kings, heralds and pursuivants of arms to attend at the Court of St. James to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 4. Directing the Lord Mayor, the Court of Aldermen and Commons of London to attend at the Royal Exchange to proclaim His Majesty King Charles III. 5. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Defence to give directions for the firing of guns at Hyde Park as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 6. Directing the Constable of His Majesty's Tower of London to give directions for the firing of guns at the Tower of London as soon as His Majesty is proclaimed. 7. Directing His Majesty's Secretary of State for Scotland to cause the proclamation for proclaiming His Majesty King Charles III to be published in Scotland. 8. Directing the Clerk of the Council to issue circular letters for causing His Majesty King Charles III to be proclaimed are hereby approved, and that concludes the business for this part of the Council. I now invite the deputation party to accompany me to wait on the King in the Council chamber.
With echoes of history, another page has been written. The Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort leading through the short distance to the throne room, just through that door. And we will join them in a moment, and there will be other members of the Privy Council who will go with them to attend upon the new king.
Ladies and gentlemen,
and for those still here, further signatures will be given under the instructions that we're hearing being given.
Proclamation, which is laid out in the lower corridor as you depart. Come by this way. Thank you. The City Civic Party, I know, also have other business, so we'll want to depart at this point. I also invite any non-privy councillors to depart from the doors at the rear via the matted hall, signing the proclamation in the lower corridor as you leave. And lastly, may I invite the witnesses to the oath for upholding the security of the Church of Scotland, if you would like to move down into the throne room.
Throne room, the Earl Marshal,
As I departed, people
with attendant representatives.
Privy councillors only, those
And one might recall quite what it must have been like for an 18-year-old Queen Victoria to walk in to the throne room of St James's on ascending the throne, and for each monarch since her. Each of them dealing with a recognition of a personal tragedy and sadness in a family, and taking on the burden of kingship. The Earl Marshal now the last to head through to the throne room with the representatives who will be coming with him, former prime ministers who will wait on the arrival of the king. Representing a broad range of parties, religion, service to the United Kingdom through Parliament in different roles for the new king. The thing about Privy Councils is that they always exercise their business standing up, which was deemed to be a sensible way of making sure that the councils themselves didn't last too long. And they are by nature functionary, and business can therefore be dealt with quite quickly. It's a very richly decorated part of the palace, with red damask walls, all in hangings, surrounded by all these amazing paintings of monarchs in the past. And the king will probably come in through the door on the left there, and out the window at the gardens of Clarence House. And you can see the plant badges of the United Kingdom on different parts of the canopy hanging down above the throne here. On Monday, she seemed in good heart as the council are brought to order. When the king comes in, a bow will be made and he will make his statement.
Business for part 2 of the Council. Your Majesty, to make your declaration.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathise with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. It is the greatest consolation to me to know of the sympathy expressed by so many to my sister and brothers, and that such overwhelming affection and support should be extended to our whole family in our loss. To all of us as a family, as to this kingdom and the wider family of nations of which it is a part, my mother gave an example of lifelong love and of selfless service. My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. In this purpose, I know that I shall be upheld by the affection and loyalty of the peoples whose sovereign I have been called upon to be, and that in the discharge of these duties, I will be guided by the counsel of their elected parliaments. In all this, I am profoundly encouraged by the constant support of my beloved wife. I take this opportunity to confirm my willingness and intention to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to my government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports my official duties as head of state and head of nation. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
I have with humble duty to crave your Majesty's permission for the publication of your gracious speech.
Approved.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
I understand that the law requires that I should, at my accession to the Crown, take and subscribe the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland. I am ready to do so at this first opportunity. I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland in prosecution of the claim of right, and particularly by an act intituled An Act for Securing the Protestant Religion and Presbyterian Church Government, and by the acts passed in the Parliament of both kingdoms for union of the two kingdoms, together with the government, worship, discipline, rights and privileges of the Church of Scotland. So help me God.
I now invite your Majesty to subscribe both copies of the instrument, confirming the oath has been taken.
Noting that the King is signing Charles Rex, Charles R.
I now invite the witnesses to His Majesty's oath to sign both copies of the instrument.
And for the first time, the Prince of Wales signing William P. for Princeps, which is the Latin for prince. You will note that for an order in council to be approved by the monarch, just the simple word approved makes it enacted. And the remaining business will be thus attended. In the background, while the signatures, particularly the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Right Honourable Alistair Jack, you can hear in the background the music of the Coldstream Guards as the King's Guard is forming up in Friary Court for the proclamation to be read out by Garter King of Arms later on. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, signing the two documents. First time, First Minister of Scotland has taken part in this significant part of the Accession Council. In the background, the private secretaries of the former Queen, the present King, former Queen's private secretary will continue to serve the new King, and also of the Prince of Wales.
Draft of an order in council authorising Your Majesty's declaration to be made public.
Approved.
Draft of an order in council for recording the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland to be transmitted to the Court of Session, to be recorded in the books of Sediment and afterwards lodged in the State Papers of Scotland and in the Council Register.
Approved.
Draft order in council determining the form of proclamation for proclaiming Your Majesty in the realms and in the British Overseas Territories.
Approved.
Draft of an order in council authorising the Lord Chancellor to make use of the Great Seal for sealing all things whatsoever that pass the Great Seal until another Great Seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in council authorising the Lord Privy Seal, if need be, to make use of the existing Privy Seal until another Privy Seal is prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Drafts of 3 orders in council authorising Your Majesty's principal Secretaries of State, the Lord Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, to use the existing seals until other seals be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in council authorising Your Majesty's Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to make use of the existing Great Seal of Northern Ireland until another seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Scotland to make use of the Great Seal of Scotland until another Great Seal of Scotland be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising Your Majesty's First Minister of Wales to make use of the existing Welsh seal until another Welsh seal be prepared and authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council authorising the public seals authorising the respective public seals lately in use elsewhere than in the United Kingdom to be made use of until new seals be prepared and their use duly authorised.
Approved.
Draft of an order in Council confirming Your Majesty's wishes in relation to the Sovereign Grant Act 2011 to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to your government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports your official duties as head of state and head of nation.
Approved.
Drafts of 2 proclamations. 1. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. 2. Appointing the day of Her late Majesty's state funeral as a bank holiday in Scotland. And of 2 orders in Council directing the Lord Chancellor to affix the Great Seal to the proclamations.
Approved.
I now invite Your Majesty to sign both proclamations. And that, Your Majesty, concludes today's business for the Council.
With bows from all the Privy Council, the King, the Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort leave, followed by their household.
May I
And
now
whilst
invite
all
the
the business is
deputation
not
party and the witnesses to the oath to exit via the picture gallery and the matted hall.
Members of the Council will now take positions such as they are able, along with the King, the Queen Consort and the Prince of Wales, to witness the proclamation that will take place.
I now ask
at 11
Privy
o'clock.
Councillors present to exit via the picture gallery and the matted hall and invite you to sign the proclamation, which is laid out in the lower corridor. Thank you all for attending today.
As they depart, it is interesting to notice how much attention is given to great seals and seals. All seals are the means of authority being stamped and confirmation given to any instrument or enactment, and so consequently, as they are all currently bearing reference to the late Queen, permission needs to be given for them to carry on until the new ones are made. And when the new ones are made, they will be presented to the monarch, who will be invited to deface with a hammer the old Great Seal. And this is done deliberately in order to make sure that no one could use seals because of their power in enacting law in the wrong way. But we have witnessed a remarkable moment, the confirmation by the High Council, as it were, the Privy Council of the United Kingdom, of the death of Elizabeth II and of the accession of the new King, Charles III. And shortly, with all these signatures being placed upon confirmation of the proclamation that the Accession Council has just given approval to, it will be passed to Garter King of Arms, David White, who will then, with the Heralds, Pursuivants and Kings of Arms, along with the Sergeant at Arms, which we will see, and the State Trumpeters, take their place on the balcony overlooking Friary Court at exactly 11 o'clock. And a reminder that today, although we are in the mourning process for Elizabeth II, is defined to be a day of celebration of the new King. And that's why, at the moment, flags are being raised across the kingdom to full mast, and they will remain at full mast until 1 hour after the last proclamation, which will be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon tomorrow. It's very normal, isn't it, that sometimes pens don't work, and this is such a significant document, and everyone will be wanting to make sure that their signature is properly made. This is a document that will go into the archive of the nation, and for those who are signing, who come from all different walks of political persuasion and interest, this is a non-political moment, a punctuation point in the national story. And just as the state does occasionally step in and order the process of the political argument and push, this is one of those moments where we stop and think about how the Constitution rests through ancient tradition upon a non-political head of state who has inherited from his mother the responsibility. And now, in this long gallery, where often they have laid out books of remembrance and will later on for those who will wish to sign books of condolence to the Queen.
A bit better.
And Rhiannon, just on practical matters, we got some new information, didn't we, during the course of that process, about the funeral, that it will be a bank holiday.
Yes, so we now know that the King has approved an order declaring that we will all have a bank holiday on the day of the funeral. When is that day? We don't know at the moment, but...
Do we know when we will be told, when that will be decided?
So we're anticipating that we're going to have the first briefing in terms of what we can expect over the coming days and potentially the date of that funeral later this afternoon. So hopefully by this evening we will know when that bank holiday is going to be and a few more details about what is to come over the next days or so.
Well, let's rejoin Alistair Bruce, our royal commentator. And Alistair, we're, 4 or 5 minutes away from this moment in history for the first time since 1952, when we are going to hear the reading of the proclamation of a new monarch.
As you speak, the state trumpeters coming out onto the balcony here above Friary Court. And the intention of this event is to speak to a nation, a Commonwealth in mourning, and to raise the heads of that nation to celebrate that there is a new monarch. From the window onto this balcony will come the pursuivants, heralds, and kings of arms of the College of Arms. Also the sergeants at arms, the heralds wearing the tabards which show the coat of arms of the king. Kings of arms wearing white plumes on their cocked hats, and also with them will come the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk. They will spread across the balcony. And here comes the Garter King of Arms, David White, with the Earl Marshal beside him, holds the proclamation.
Have we had the trumpets?
Waiting for the moment of 11 o'clock when the guns will start to fire to mark the announcement that the King has given instruction to be read out, that the Queen has died and approved by the Privy Council. He has now been identified and confirmed as the rightful new King. From the principal palace of the monarchy here at St. James's, the principal proclamation will be made at the moment 11 o'clock strikes, and they'll be watched by the new King, by the Queen Consort, the Prince of Wales, and waiting down below, the King's Guard, Number 7 Company, 2nd Battalion Coldstream Guards, who will later present arms to celebrate the new King, and then we'll give 3 cheers to His Majesty. The principal proclamation of King Charles III.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords Spiritual and Temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. By the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at St. James's Palace this 10th day of September in the year of our Lord, 2022.
The captain of the King's Guard will now order the troops to present arms, and the colour will be lowered. And then God save the King.
God save the King!
To a great cheer, the captain of the guard brings the troops out of the present, and they will now ground their arms, place their rifles on the ground, and prepare to give 3 cheers. They kneel down, place their rifles, and return. So with joy, wherever you are, if you wish, join in with 3 cheers for the new king.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray!
Captain of the King's Guard will now instruct replacing of headdress, the recovery of the arms, and Garter King of Arms, the Kings of Arms, the Heralds Pursuivants of the College of Arms will then, along with the Heralds Extraordinary, leave from the balcony. And the principal proclamation of the new reign is done. We wait to find out the date of the state funeral of the late Queen, which will be announced later, but the nation in mourning has raised its head and will, in the proclamations that take place across the United Kingdom, I see in Edinburgh, the guns are firing in salute to the proclamation having been made, and having completed that gun salute, they fall out as the heralds and kings return into St. James's Palace. the state trumpeters, the last to leave from the balcony. Meanwhile, the Coldstream Guards, who form the King's Guard at the moment on the royal palaces, who have turned out for this moment, form back into position. The Coldstream Guards band, who played for the first formal playing of the national anthem, To God Save the King, and they prepare to march. They're saluting the colour of the parade ground here in Flowery Court. The colour which has been carried and lowered in salute was also adorned with 2 black mourning bands and also a wreath to mark that this is the anniversary of a battle honour for the King's Guard. City of London, because they fire 62 guns, 20 for the City of London, 21 for the Tower, and an extra 20 because it's a royal fortress. And the Honourable Artillery, the oldest regiment in the British Army there, firing the remnant of those shots from the gun salute as the King's Guard return to their duties, protecting Buckingham Palace and St James's Palace. And in Hyde Park too, the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery, continue to... So when King George VI changed the name of the King's Troop, it had been the Riding Troop. On the Queen's accession, she wanted to respect her father by keeping the name the King's Troop throughout her reign. And now, of course, the title makes sense with the new king. Coldstream Guards band return to the guardroom here at St James's Palace.
Number 2! Number 2! Fire! Fire! Number 1! Load! Carter! Number 3! 3! Fire! Carter!
And Alistair, as the ceremonial here at St James's Palace comes to an end, we have just seen, I suppose, the full pomp and circumstance of the British state, and something we're going to see much more of during the course of this momentous week, momentous 10 days.
It's going to be very moving because the Queen having died, there is personal views about that all across the nation and around the world. But the ceremonial which is being prepared for her state funeral, whenever that is ultimately announced to be, will demonstrate the very best of what can be done to reflect upon a great reign well lived and well served. But we will see much more, as you say, in the coming months as we build up to the coronation of His Majesty the King at Westminster Abbey, a ceremony which is pretty much unchanged since the Archbishop St Dunstan crowned Edgar the Peaceable in the year 973. And the idea that it is the last coronation that still takes place in the Western world is a sign of how traditions evolve and the foundation stone of what people are used to continue. And it doesn't prevent the political process, modernisation and everything else from taking place, but it vests the new king in the context of what we all are, which is people carrying on a national story and adding pages to it, and more pages were added today.
Indeed. I just want to bring in our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, with me here, just outside St James's Palace, looking up at the balcony above Friary Court where that proclamation was made. And Rhiannon, I mean, it was quite something, wasn't it? It almost transported you way back to medieval times when that was the way you found out who the new monarch was.
We really had a front row seat to what I think was an example of ancient pageantry, but really observed through all of the lenses that have developed and evolved throughout Queen Elizabeth's reign. And we saw people, and people are still here now, with their mobile phones, making sure that they were able to witness this moment. But also what was very striking for me was, for 7 decades, we have become accustomed to that resounding sound of God Save the Queen. And today we witnessed a crowd singing God Save the King. I think I can step aside because I believe that Keir Starmer is here,
indeed.
And he was there in the Privy Council, so I will step to one side for you.
Keir, very good to see you. And just tell us what you made of that experience. I mean, a unique experience for us all.
Unique, a real moment in history. And, you know, as one era ends, so another begins. And, you know, it's been mixed emotions.
The long, long reach of history, you know, where, you know, got here for to paraphrase Shakespeare, for a few fleeting moments, but this reaches back, way back into antiquity.
That's right, and to have a story that's more than just my story, to say, well, as a community, a very diverse community, religiously, ethnically, all the rest of it, diverse community, working its way forward, trying to find a story that they can all hold in common. That's a hugely important positive thing.
It's interesting, that point you make there, Your Grace, about diversity, is that sense, you know, I was thinking in my head as I looked particularly at the members of the public, I think, you know, they would have been very different 70 years ago when it last happened.
Yes, I think the members of the Privy Council are rather less different.
Yes, well, I do think that as well. It has to change.
It'll take time to catch up. But yes, looking around myself, I thought, in terms of age, in terms of race, background, wonderful to see such diversity and very promising for the future.
And then also the spontaneous cheering and applause. I mean, they couldn't let as many people who wanted to get in here. It's rather a narrow space and there are safety concerns. But on Pall Mall up there, the Mall down there, we can hear all the way down to Buckingham Palace. There are thousands of people congregated. And, you know, if they weren't getting a piped feed to them, they were listening and watching on their phones, as is the way these days. And it was those spontaneous 3 cheers and then God Save the King breaks out.
Yes, I found a little prickle in the eyes when we started singing God Save the King. First time I've sung it in those terms. And tomorrow morning in our parish church we'll be singing that as well. And that'll, I think, be the emotional moment for a lot of people.
Rowan Williams, thank you very much indeed for your time. Very good to see you. Thank you. Former Archbishop his thoughts on the meeting of the Accession Council, a council, of course, of which he was part, to announce and acknowledge the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and the accession, it's in the name, the accession of King Charles III. We're turning our attention now to other parts of London. This is the City of London, where this process continues, where proclamations are going to be read out, first of all in the capital and then beyond. Alistair Bruce will talk us through this, the scene, as I say, in the City of London.
We're seeing the Court of Common Council, which is like the House of Commons of the City of London, being led in their blue robes. They are elected on a regular basis and serve the different wards which the City of London is divided into. And they obviously are like a parliament and raise taxes from all the people who live within the City of London and from the businesses that operate, and many of the livery companies that have their homes and bases here. And the Royal Exchange building, which was the centre of commerce, is behind the pillars that we see here. And because it's right at the heart of the City of London and it faces where the Lord Mayor lives, which is known as the Mansion House, it is deemed the best and most appropriate place for major occasions to occur. The War Memorial is there, and it reflects upon so many of the people who worked in the city and who left to serve during various different battles. Also, after the Court of Common Council, in the other robes will be the aldermen, the aldermanic representatives. Each of the wards is represented by aldermen and women, of course, and they wear the scarlet robes, and it is from that number that the Lord Mayor is selected each year, and former Lord Mayors continue for a few years after and hold their position of authority within the city. And it's a gathering, really, of a city life that reflects that it, too, is loyal to His Majesty the King. The Royal Standard at Buckingham Palace, which is completely unchanged from the one that we recall from the time of Queen Elizabeth II, in the top right-hand corner. If it was flying in the opposite direction, you have the English lions, and they're repeated in one of the lower quarters, and also at the top you have the Lion Rampant of Scotland and the Golden Harp of Northern Ireland, and it flies underneath the crown on top of Buckingham Palace. Meanwhile, in the city, the band of the Household Division bringing in what you have here is the Honourable Artillery Company's band. They look just like the Brigade of Guards, except instead of gold they have silver, because they are reservists, and they'll bring in the pikemen and musketeers, also formed from the Honourable Artillery Company, and one of the ancient bodyguards of the City of London.
Well, we're going to stay on those scenes, those ceremonial scenes in the City of London. But I want to talk now to James Matthews at Balmoral, our Scotland correspondent, of course. And James, the fact that, yes, it's starting now, the proclamation, the new King's proclamation in London. But, of course, it's going to take place, it's going to be read out, it's going to be heard. Matthews at Balmoral, thank you very much indeed. We're going back now live to the City of London, the heart of old London, what once was London itself. Our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, will describe to us the scenes that we're witnessing, and this, the second proclamation, as we can see at the bottom of our screens, and this will be the second proclamation of Charles III, and an hour's gap from the original one here at St James's Palace.
Dermot, there used to be 3, but they've cut it down to just these 2 now, and the second will take place here in the City of London by ancient tradition. The state trumpeters who've been led from Guildhall Yard, along with the other military components, and they will take their position. And you'll see that on the banners of their trumpets are the black mourning ribbons to remind us that this is a sad and muffled occasion as the drum itself plays them into position. And we'll shortly see at 20 past the arrival of Clarenceau, King of Arms, who will read out the proclamation accompanied by other heralds who will be in the party. And it's a reminder that while we are so used to instantaneously knowing every piece of information, information was passed around before the days of technology in a very much more sedentary way, and it would have taken up to an hour for the heralds to arrive here. They used to come by carriage, but they're coming by vehicles now. And we are at the heart of this marketplace, and there in the background of the picture you can see the Bank of England. You can see obviously the War Memorial, and everyone now gathered in this public area that is naturally formed by the Bank of England, the Royal Exchange, the building on which steps the aldermen can be seen, and the scene is set with the great equestrian statue of the Duke of Wellington, who, after all, had brought victory and freedom from the danger that was seen in Napoleon way back at the time when the city was very nervous that if Napoleon won, the wealth of Britain would be lost. And so, with the pikemen and musketeers, with their colour present, the scene is effectively set, and you can see the area in the middle of the steps there where Clarenceau, King of Arms, will read out the proclamation. And we will see very much a similar event carried out as took place at St James's. And for the King, this is the progression of news. He gave instruction, if you remember, by saying approved, that these proclamations should take place across his kingdom. And some nations still reflect the fact that it takes time, and so some of these proclamations will indeed take place tomorrow in those different, more distant parts of the United Kingdom from London.
The King has been part of the Commonwealth, visiting the Commonwealth for his whole life. And when he said last year that this was one of the foundation stones of who he is, that really resonated with all of those leaders. And if you had seen the warmth of the welcome that the then Prince Charles, now our King Charles III, had in Kigali, it was warming. And I think all of them now, and you've listened to what the leaders have been saying, really honouring the Queen, but welcoming King Charles, who they know and actually have grown to have great affection for.
Baroness Scotland, thank you so much for joining us here on Sky News, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth of Nations. Well, here we are at St James's Palace, where the proclamation of Charles III was made at precisely 11 a.m. today in front of members of the Accession Council, including Baroness Scotland and so many others, members of the public, and, of course, on the balcony here, the proclamation read out. It's now going to be read out in the City of London.
The state trumpeters announcing to the people of London that the heralds are here and they have a proclamation to make. And that proclamation will be made by Clarenceau King of Arms, who will come from the Mansion House where that first fanfare was made, and the procession will be formed to bring Clarenceau King of Arms to the steps of the Royal Exchange, led by the Parade Marshal, Marshal of the City. The heralds still wearing the tabards that show the King's coat of arms. And let's recall the concept of what it must have meant to a city going about its business and suddenly hearing the trumpeters of the monarch announcing that the messengers of royal authority, the kings of arms, the heralds of arms and the pursuivants of arms have arrived with a proclamation of some note. Was it about the king? Was it about war? What is it about? For this was the way that communication from the monarch used to be made. And following the heralds and the kings, the sheriffs of the City of London, the chaplain of the Lord Mayor, the sword bearer and mace bearer of the City of London, and the Lord Mayor of London is escorting Clarenceau King of Arms, Mr. Tim Duke, who will read the proclamation, followed by the City Remembrancer, responsible for all ceremonial events that take place in the city. And they will line up in front of the Royal Exchange, and at precisely 12 o'clock, the proclamation will be given. The tabard was evolved from the coat of arms that used to be worn over armour by kings. And indeed, old tabards that were worn by kings were precisely the garments that were passed to the king's heralds in order that they could move around the battlefield and communicate as necessary in the king's name. At a minute to 12, the state trumpeters will sound a fanfare, and the common cry and the sergeant of arms will demand silence. And at 12 o'clock, Clarenceau King of Arms will read the proclamation and will proclaim at the end, "God save the King." Once again, we'll have a verse of the national anthem, and the Lord Mayor will then call for 3 cheers. Immediately afterwards, the procession will reform. Clarenceau King of Arms in position with the proclamation. It's quite an unwieldy piece of paper, particularly in high wind, but fortunately that is not the challenge at the moment. And to the right of the picture, we see the cocked hat of the City Marshal, who will give instruction on precisely when events are to take place. And the intention is to hit exactly noon, which was following the instructions given by the King by order in council at the accession council we earlier witnessed. Of course, the delays may seem long now, but when in the old days, the trumpet having been sounded, there would have been a great run of people, hurry to the exchange. There's going to be an announcement. And today we have order and pageantry, which has evolved over the years. And it is a tribute to the late Queen, who so regularly attended events here in the City of London. We can recall the famous walkabout she did at her Silver Jubilee and her Golden Jubilee, when she came to St. Paul's Cathedral in her golden coronation carriage to give thanks to Almighty God in St. Paul's Cathedral for a reign of first 25 years and then 50. And she returned again on the 60th anniversary, but alone, and walked alone down the great aisle of St. Paul's, the City of London's cathedral. And then for her 70th anniversary, the Platinum Jubilee, there was a sadness that she could not attend due to mobility issues. And of course it was a part of what we now know was preparing her for the gathering of the angels earlier this week. The City of London awaits news, the confirmation that there is a new king. The state trumpeters at the Royal Exchange will now sound a fanfare. And the trumpeters of the Mansion House will reply, and the Common Crier and the Sergeant-at-Arms will demand silence.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We therefore, the Lord Spiritual and Temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London, and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, Head of the Commonwealth, Defender of the Faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at St. James's Palace this 10th day of September in the year of our Lord, 2022. God save the King. God save the King.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray!
The proclamation done in the City of London. And the crowd that had gathered, which, again, in its own way, reflects the history of why this ceremony takes place, expressing their joy and delight at the accession of King Charles III. The City Marshal, Parade Marshal here, now leads the procession away from the Royal Exchange and back to the Mansion House, the home and official residence of the Lord Mayor. And for the Kings of Arms, heralds and pursuivants, both in ordinary and extraordinary, for the new king, it's the conclusion of their duties at this point. And for us all to see now further proclamations, and they can be done, and sometimes will be, at small towns and villages, in accordance with custom or choice, but it is the way in which the formal acknowledgement of a new reign is communicated across the United Kingdom. And we will witness similar events with similar local customs, perhaps none quite so flamboyantly decorous as the City of London, with the pikemen and musketeers who echo periods of English history that go back to the challenges of defending this City of London as a heart and source of commerce and markets over the centuries. We have a new king, and the City of London will return to its business on Monday, of course with the muted reality of a nation in grief for the late Queen, but business and the markets never sleep.
Members of his family.
And I think within these very formal proceedings, we watched the most ancient pageantry, didn't we, unfold on the balcony here. But we're again reminded that at the centre of all of this, you have a family who are in mourning. And King Charles, in his message that he again delivered as he signed his oath, reflected on how much it means to the family to know that there is such overwhelming support for them at this moment, and praised his mother's example of lifelong service. But he will now be incredibly conscious that he now needs the support of his family who are around him. And as you mentioned there, you had the new Prince of Wales, Prince William, there as a Privy Councillor, and also Camilla, his Queen Consort, standing so close to him as he was reading out, again, a very heartfelt message, his pledge to continue the service that his mother gave us over 7 decades. But also an interesting point that we've been told is that the ink pot that was on the desk, which was used to then sign that oath, was actually a gift from Prince William and Prince Harry. So you're getting those little touches, aren't you, where they are showing us that as a family they're finding it difficult to come to terms with this, but they are pulling together. But for him, of course, the hard work continues. The oath is over, the proclamation is done, but this afternoon the constitutional duties, he picks those up once again. So as you were hearing from Keir Starmer earlier, He is one of a few who is going to enjoy an audience with the King this afternoon. So we know that the King will receive the Archbishop of Canterbury at Buckingham Palace. He will then receive the Prime Minister again, but also with members of the Cabinet. After that, he will receive leaders of the opposition, so the likes of Keir Starmer, who you spoke to earlier. And then he's also going to speak to the Dean of Westminster as well. That, we understand, is going to be a private meeting, and you would understand why, because of the likely involvement of the Dean of Westminster when it comes to that state funeral that we will look towards in the coming days.
Tough to ask, Rhiannon, but it has to be addressed. Did we learn anything about the state funeral itself?
So, we hadn't expected this, but it was confirmed that the King has signed an order in which he has authorised that we will have a national bank holiday on the day of the funeral. However, it has not been announced yet when that funeral is going to be held. You have to remember that the planning for this event has been decades in the making. But ultimately, one of the key responsibilities of the new King, as it would be for any grieving family, is to look again at the funeral plans, decide whether or not they believe that they are still fitting with what Her late Majesty would have wanted, whether they are fitting with what the family want to portray, and whether they are a fitting way to allow the country and the rest of the world to pay their respects. But later on today, we are anticipating we will potentially get a date for that funeral. And also, of course, we have to remember this has all happened so quickly. It was only on Tuesday that we saw the Queen carrying out that last official duty in public as she oversaw the handover of the Prime Ministers. She is still in Scotland. Her coffin is still in Scotland. And so we wait to see what is going to be the process over the coming days in terms of her returning to London. But as I said, expecting potentially more details on that later.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. Rhiannon Mills there, our royal correspondent. And from a ceremony here at St James's Palace, centuries in the making, the Accession Council, the taking of the oath by the new King, the proclamation of the new King, King Charles III, and a personal declaration from the King paying tribute once again, as he did last night, to the qualities and the values that his mother instilled into him, that he has pledged to carry forward as he takes over as King Charles III. The proclamations now spreading throughout the country, initially just a mile or so away, as you can see there, in the City of London, where the ceremonial is still taking place. And to talk us through that and what's to come, let's go back to Buckingham Palace. The crowds gathering there, they've all dispersed from here. What a spectacle they did see here at St James's Palace, and still gathering, I know, around Buckingham Palace. My colleague Sarah Jane Mee is there.
The new good afternoon to you from Buckingham Palace. The new King, King Charles III, has been proclaimed for the second time, this time in the City of London. Thousands of people have been assembling here since yesterday. A patient stream of people coming with family, friends and flowers to the gates of Buckingham Palace. And this was a moment they hoped they would see after their patient wait. The new King returning to Buckingham Palace. The King has a busy day ahead of him. We understand he is back at Buckingham Palace now for a number of meetings this afternoon, a number of audiences. They're taking place in the 1844 room, which is described as one of the most important rooms in Buckingham Palace. You may recognise it from watching your TV screens. It's the room where the Queen has made a number of her Christmas speeches, and also where she received foreign dignitaries. But the new King and the Queen Consort arriving back. We understand that this afternoon at around 2 o'clock, the King will be receiving the Archbishop of Canterbury here at the Palace. After that, he'll also be receiving the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and members of the Cabinet. He will also have time to meet the opposition parties. And finally, later today, King Charles III will receive the Dean of Westminster here at